Jerry talking about his relo, and I feel like his home relocation. We could cut the first 2 minutes out, and we would have a storyline of content. The Jerry adventure.
Definitely the evolution of the move. I like it.
I have all kinds of earth moving equipment in my backyard because I promised my wife the one thing that's missing that she loved in the old house was a deck. This house, a deck is not as appropriate as a patio. So I have made a deal with a stonemason from Italy who's got broken English and is trying to tell me what he's going to do all day long. All day long. He knocks on the door, bangs in. He says, "Oh, let me show you. We're going to move this. It's going to go over here." And I'm going, give me a break. Show me when it's done, for God's sake. So yeah, if there's noise on, then you'll see that I get out of this really quick.
You got a guy there working on your deck. I get it.
I got a guy there working on my patio, and he's got
not a deck, it's
mountains of blue stone. He's got earth movers that are ripping my backyard up. So it's great.
Okay, I got to ask Jill because I don't know. Does anybody know the difference between what's a patio versus a deck?
I do know because my parents have lived with a patio their whole lives and they just dream of a deck. And so for them, a patio is like a cement slab. But like what they want is like the deck with the gazebo and like all of the things. So that's what I think the difference is.
A deck. Okay, wait, go back. I missed.
So patio. Yeah, like patio, like almost like a cement slab or stone slab that you walk out onto. Yep. Where like the deck is like the wood. And
a deck would be up off the ground, and you'd be walking on, some kind of composite or wood.
Got it. Okay, patio, piece of concrete, whatever you walk out on. A deck is more of a structure,
nicely designed,
right? Or Italian designed stonework.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, this is the stuff that our recruiting professional podcast audience is dying to hear about. They're dying.
It's a need to know. Yeah.
Ridiculous. All right. Are we ready to get started?
We are.
I love asking that question. Here we go, Jill.
Great.
Welcome to the CXR channel, our premier podcast for talent acquisition and talent management. Listen in as the CXR community discusses a wide range of topics focused on attracting, engaging, and retaining the best talent. We're glad you're here.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and a happy Heidi Ho to anybody who might be dialed in today. $5 for anybody who can claim to know where Heidi Ho came from. Is anybody? We're going to start by asking my partner in crime, Mr. Crispin. Mr. Crispin, do you remember a Heidi Ho?
I remember. Yes, I remember somebody using that term, or many people, and I have no idea where the etiology of that is.
Not to be confused with Mecca like a high Mecca Heini Ho.
That was your impact, your way of saying the same damn thing.
But I think I stole that. I'm pretty sure I stole that from was it Canadian? Some movie.
Probably. Could be a Belushi thing or something. It sounds like some comedy did that.
My kindred animal, Mr. Belushi. So for those of you who've just joined us and it's your first time, welcome aboard. This is the Recruiting Community Podcast. My partner in crime, Jerry Crispin, and I jump in. We do about a 20-minute chat with practitioners and leaders, folks doing the work, to talk about stuff that we think more practitioners and people doing the work would be interested in learning about. Sometimes we're talking decks and patios. And then most of the time we're talking, actually, this is a Chat GPT production. So we're not even really here right now. So it is exciting, but it's about 20 minutes long. We do have a live stream running out to Facebook, Twitter, where else? LinkedIn, YouTube, a couple of the places. You can also always find us, cxr.org/podcast. And if you're interested in being on the show, or you're interested to ask us to get somebody on the show, let us know. If you're also watching the stream and you're on LinkedIn, drop your LinkedIn profile in there and let everybody know. Anything else we should talk about before we bring in our wonderful guest today?
No, I think we're in the midst of the beginning of the HR conference season, probably the first real one since the pandemic. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that flies. I know we've got HR Transform in Vegas right now. We've got a couple others that are going on. simultaneously. Unleash is coming up at the end of the month, and I know SourceCon is going to be around. Then ERE, so there's going to be a lot of activity, and it'll be probably a bellwether for what's happening in our society and economy very quickly.
That's funny that you say that. Anybody interested, they can subscribe to the CXR Bellwether if you head out to cxr.org. I agree. I think this is our first true, full, fingers crossed, post-pandemic conference season.
Yeah.
That we're going back into. So it's going to be really interesting to sort of see how a lot of those fare. There's some new players. There have been some shifts in ownership. And I think a lot of folks are kind of, well, not a lot, but several of them are rethinking their approach to conferences. So it will be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. So let's bring in our guest, first time on the show. Welcome, Jill. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks. We seem kind of we're in our office room production state. We seem very fancy, don't we?
Yeah. Production happens everywhere these days. I can tell you that. So.
Nice segue. So Jill, talk about today. Jill, but for those who don't know you, why don't you give us kind of a couple minutes, just a quick sort of escalator pitch of who is Jill Shabelman and why should we care what the heck you have to say today?
Of course. So I've spent my career dabbling in lots of different things, from PR and marketing to higher education to eventually a long stint in talent acquisition and recruiting. So was a university recruiter, an experienced hire recruiter who still loved marketing, and eventually found my way into employer brand and recruitment marketing roles in-house at Deloitte. And I loved it. I thought it was the most fun work I'd done in my career in a long time. And what I really found I loved, and what I think a lot of us who end up in these types of roles find, is that what's most satisfying is this idea of helping to tell employee stories at your company of like why they do the work they do, the cool things they do outside of their job. And that's the stuff that really lit me up and that really mattered in the work I was doing. And so I did that for a while, and then wanted to sort of see what it was like to live on the agency side and to do this for more companies, not just for one. So landed at Stories Incorporated about 4 years ago, and I've been doing this kind of work ever since. So it's fun stuff.
I love it. Well, welcome. And I love to hear when somebody's, even if it took you to the dark side, I love to hear that you're chasing your heart. You're doing the work that gets you up in the morning and excited about work. That's great stuff.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So we're not here to do a product pitch or a sales job with Stories Incorporated, but I do think it's important for folks to understand, because we're going to talk about some topics that tie into the work that you do and why you we love you because you love the work you do. But what is it exactly, just to give a little context around what is exactly that Stories Incorporated does?
Sure. So we help to tell organizations' culture stories through employee experiences. So we're all about really hearing authentic, meaningful, genuine experiences that employees have that connect to culture concepts for a company and help to share that. And so that helps companies with recruiting efforts, internal communications and engagement internally, even things like investor relations, like anywhere that a company wants to tell the story of who they are, but through their employees. And that's the work we do. And it's been really interesting over the last few years to see this evolve. I think it's always been something that's been important for companies, but I feel like now almost, any advertisement, anything you see a company is doing, it feels like they're trying to use actual employees in that work. And so I think it's really centering on that employee experience, what it means to work there, and just all the topics that we really care about. So what is a company doing for inclusion? What are they doing for society? What are they doing to advance their employees? So I don't know, it's, I think, a really big cultural topic in general, not just thinking about how we do this from a tactical day-to-day execution standpoint.
I love the fact that, the whole focus that you have is storytelling, because I think it's so underserved. I think being able to tell a good story is, I think, an extraordinary advantage. And I'm curious, is there a body of knowledge relative to how that's done and done properly that is either part of marketing or part of HR or part of something?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling, we hear it everywhere. And I think a lot of times what I see as storytelling is often just sort of a testimonial of, it feels like a family here. And that's awesome if someone feels that way. But what really is more meaningful is if they can actually tell a story about a time that maybe their wife was ill and their team came together to do something significant for them, and then what it meant to them. And so for us, storytelling is about how is it relatable and true? How does it give real insight? How does it inspire action? And so as we're thinking about storytelling, we're thinking about how do we tell someone's story in a way that does all of those things versus it just feeling like a platitude or a testimonial or something that anyone could say about any company. So
Yeah, and so Jill, I've done the work where where we tried to do it in house, right?
mhm.
And we did do it in house, and it was done quite well, but it was so much work.
Yeah.
Identifying people who should tell that story, like who have a story to tell,
Yep.
and then narrowing it down to people who, it is an interesting enough story, compelling enough that you want to put it on video. And then, and this is not the popular thing to say, there are some people who aren't really meant for video storytelling or audio storytelling, right? The different channels that
Yeah.
maybe their voice or whatever it is about them doesn't really complement, what you're trying to do or create an engagement piece, and or feels awkward
Yeah.
when they're trying to tell that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of organizations struggle with creating authentic and compelling employer brand messaging. So
Yeah.
what would be, if you had to give one or two tips or strategies for like uncovering and showcasing a unique culture and value, like that you can deliver an authentic story with an authentic employee that way? Are there any one or two things you would say that folks should keep in mind, whether they're going outsourcing that, going out of house to do it, or whether they're going to try to keep it in house?
Yeah. There's a few things. I mean, I do think everyone has a story that they can tell. And it's this idea of having a space where they feel comfortable doing that. So some vulnerability on the interviewer side to help them open up and be a little more vulnerable. And so making sure that the way you're preparing them and the way that you're setting up a conversation makes them feel really comfortable. It's not like, there's 7 lights staring at you and this feels like so much pressure, but like, how do we just make it about me and you, me as the interviewer, you as a storyteller, and this is a conversation that just happens to be recorded. And so I think it's really figuring out how do you create a space like that so someone can feel comfortable to open up. So that's the first piece. And then the second is this idea of just digging a little deeper. And so, there's that thing of like ask 5 whys, but like keep asking, like, why does this matter? Like, why was that important? And like try to get the emotion behind it, or like, how did you feel in that moment? Or why did that matter for you or matter for your team? But to really get something that feels just, I don't know, just more interesting to a viewer, because that's what people actually want to see, is like their brain and their heart want to hear a story because it tugs some emotion in them. And so it's like getting that emotion out of someone else, which is not easy. And there's an art to it. And again, it's that idea of like making someone feel comfortable so they can open up in that way.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. So one of the things you said sort of resonated with me is the unscripted feel.
Yeah.
Because if anybody's ever written a script for somebody to read on camera, and this point was made really well. We recently had a recruitment, marketing, and branding meeting with our members, live meeting in person. Woohoo, we're back. But we got to sit down and talk, and a lot of them were talking about that element of delivering that brand and that story, and that some are really struggling with. They write these scripts based on the story they're given, or the employee writes the script. And while it does come from the heart, they then go to read it, and written word is not the same at all with spoken word. So you come off a little robotic there.
You really do. And that's why we try to, our approach is always organic. We try to not script anything unless a client like really feels strongly about it. But I think the magic comes in those little nuggets that you just don't even expect. And a lot of times they're at the end of the interview when like you're done and the person's like, whew. And then you're like, well, is there anything else? Like anything we didn't talk about? And they're like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot. And it's like this most amazing story that they tell that you're like, well, that's the nugget. Like that's what we needed. And it would have never come out if it was scripted and we just were trying to like go off of what they thought they wanted to talk about. So I think, you need to leave a lot of room for white space in this to really get the good stuff.
Yeah, I think it's almost like it's almost like the podcast. So Jerry hears me say this almost every time before we turn on the mics or before we activate the feed. We're in the green room, we're just chatting, and I feel like, oh, we're wasting great content in here. There's great chatter. Like before, we're talking about Andrew Godomsky and hanging out at his parents' house doing a wine thing after he helped put on this fantastic event, for employment branding umpteen years ago where we met. So I feel like, oh, we missed that. That should have been in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hear that. Leave the mics on a little longer, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. And, we just did a project that I loved, and it was with a company who does, at the end of the year, core values awards. And so they award 10 winners around the country who really embody their core values. And they wanted to do something fun to help show this and reveal it. They were creating videos that they could share at a town hall that was virtual. And so we did these, what we are calling facilitated conversations, where we had the manager of the person who was winning and the award winner, who didn't know they were a winner yet, sit down and have a conversation with each other. So they had cards and they were asking each other questions like, why do you like being my manager? Or what's the coolest thing you've done here? And just sort of getting some banter. And then midway through, the manager reveals that you're the winner of this value award. And so you get this like real time reaction. Some was tears, some was laughter and disbelief. And you just get this like really meaningful conversation happening, where then the manager can turn around and say, like, here's all the amazing things you do for this company and like why you won this. And like capturing that on film was incredible. And so I think there's so many opportunities to do that kind of stuff.
It is. While you were talking about that, what occurred to me is that's exactly what Walmart does at their stock meeting, their annual meeting for stocks. They bring in a person from every store in the world. And in front of them at various points when they're going through the numbers and all the other stuff, they bring on stage people who embodied their particular core values, and they celebrate them with a story about that. And the place goes absolutely nuts.
Yep.
And that's exactly what they're doing. Fascinating to me.
Yeah. I love that they're doing that in real time. And I just think it helps others connect to the story, and it helps them understand like why it's so meaningful, and maybe inspires other people to want to live that too and live those values. So there's so much cool work that can be done here.
So, well, let me ask you, Jill, if from a technology and innovation standpoint, we're seeing a lot of stuff. We make the jokes all day long because now it's just fun, but this Chat GPT and Bard and this new sort of language proficient engine that is creating content for us or lumping content together. I mean, we have a take on how we think this can be used for certainly for employment marketing and branding.
Yeah.
Do you have a take on sort of, how folks should be considering this new technology when crafting any type of message or like cultural messaging at their organization?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a point of view quite yet. There's still some research I want to do. I mean, I think obviously for written content, it feels pretty natural. Like there's a way to help it do some written content that you can then review and finesse a little. Like, I don't know how it helps in the more, like we've been talking about, like authentic, genuine, like real emotional content. Like, I don't know. I mean, I've seen some of the stuff where they go pretty deep and they get pretty emotional in the, in the AI stuff, but I don't know. I'm not there yet. So,
okay. Well,
yeah.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying I'm not ready to make a statement on it yet. But so now I got to put you in a little bit of a corner and say, well, then what do you see changing in this space over the next 5 years, whether it's technology or story style or whatever? Like how do you see this type of work developing in the next 5 years?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we saw in maybe the previous 5 years was like the rise of employee generated content and wanting to find ways for employees to tell their stories and tell it sort of like on their own, which is great. And I think it works in some cases, but in some it doesn't always. Like an employee, I think when they have to turn on their phone and answer some prompt, they're worried about what do I look like? And is the lighting okay? And what do I really say? And so it comes off really nervous. And so I think there's this like evolution of like, how do we get that good employee generated content stuff, but it maybe in a little bit more of a facilitated production-y way. And so, obviously the work of agencies of like going to a company office and doing one day of a bunch of interviews and a ton of B-roll, like that's still going to happen and it still needs to happen. But what we're finding is like, we can do interviews around the world virtually and have it still look and sound good. And I think there's going to be a lot more technology in that way of how do we do these conversations? How does it look good? How do we help do this around the world and anywhere? It could be someone in Singapore, it could be someone in Buenos Aires and someone in Israel. And I think there's now telling stories in organizations through technology. And we've been doing it since 2020 when the pandemic hit and we had to talk to people virtually. But I think there's tons more opportunity for that.
Yeah.
I really do think that we're going to see a lot more of the personalization, if you will, of us as human beings,
Yeah.
as opposed to simply what we do at work, but how it
Yep.
connects perhaps to the
Totally.
rest of our life, that kind of
Yeah.
holistic feel. And people are becoming more comfortable with that. And
Mhm.
I think a younger generation is growing up really comfortable looking at their phone with no one there and talking to it in an asynchronous way to a bunch of friends that suddenly get that and then send something back.
Yeah.
I find that amazing that they're able to do that. And most of us who grew up without those kinds of tools, if the whole thing still feels a little bit awkward.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that's a great point about this idea of getting to know people outside of who they are at work. And, we've seen that so much over the last few years. And we've done some work where we actually go in their homes in person, taking great photos of them and their kids jumping on the trampoline in their backyard. And, just all these things that like help tell a better story about not only a person, but how are connections fostered at work, and how do they still have a connection to a company even if they do work at home and they do work hybrid? Like just all these stories that we need to tell where companies have said like, okay, this is our plan, and maybe it's some return to work, some hybrid, some remote.
Tell candidates' interest and to
Yeah.
attract candidates' interest as most appropriate for the organization. I just think it is such a fine art, and just I don't think enough people I don't think enough organizations have an exceptional delivery of that.
Yeah.
And having said that, I don't know how organizations could do it any better. So I'm glad there are people out there that this is what they do all day long, trying to figure out how to make those connections. But you keep saying that, and I keep thinking, Jill, I don't have a really great example of 4 or 5 companies off the top of my head that when I watch an employment video or a culture video, I go, oh my gosh, wow. Like,
Yeah.
is there one that you would just call out? Maybe it's not the pinnacle, but is there one that you call out that people should really take notice of?
Yeah, I think there's a couple companies doing interesting things with employees and storytelling, but I also think, to your point, Chris, about repelling or attracting candidates, like every piece of content is going to impact someone differently. And I think it depends where they are in the candidate journey, what they're interested in, what their background is, what their interests are, and if they connect to that piece of content. So that idea of like personalized, it's personalized in the fact that there's only certain people who are going to be attracted to that piece of content because it matters to them. But a couple companies that I think are trying to do new things and think of how to tell stories globally and in different ways. Dell Technologies is someone we've worked with for a long time. And I think they are really focused on this idea of how do we really tell meaningful things about our employees and doing it around the world. It's not just about what happens in Austin, it's what happens all over the world. And we've been lucky to be a part of a lot of that. And I think they're really invested in it. And I don't know, it shows, I think, in the engagement they get in the work that they're doing. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the leadership team there, I think you do some work with Train also. Did I
Yes.
imagine that? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Dell and Train, both members of ours, both have just incredible TA leadership. And I love that they're leaning in on that content.
Yeah, we just actually did a project with Train last year, 2021, 2022. And it was actually internal, focused on mental health and mental well-being. So coming out of the pandemic and in the pandemic, just noticing like, wow, we really need to help people just, figure out how do we work through mental health challenges. And we did a whole anti-stigma campaign where we interviewed people, again, around the world who told their mental health journey and their stories. And some of the stories are incredibly vulnerable. And the fact that Train was so willing to put this out there and to have these conversations was really, really remarkable. So yeah, they're doing great work.
And it was done internal. Were these showcased externally or only showcased externally?
One was like a compilation was showcased externally, but the rest were used internally to really help just sort of this anti-stigma of it's okay to talk about mental health here, and there's support for you.
Oh, I love that. I haven't seen that yet. I'll have to go look it up.
Yeah, it's cool stuff.
So Jill, I'm going to ask you a question we ask everybody before we wrap up the show. If you were going to write a book today on the topic of your passion, right, on the topic of storytelling, what would the title of that book be?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I go back to the line, like, everyone has a story, because I think it's true. It feels a little lame, but I'm going to have to stay there, I think. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I love it. And who gets the first signed copy? You can't cop out and give it to Jerry or I. You get
I wish I could give it to my grandma, who is not here with us anymore, but I've been digging into her story and doing some historical family research. And she was an amazing woman who was, before her time, racing cars with men and a nurse in World War II and the beaches of Normandy and all this cool stuff. So she has a story. So I would give it to her.
Oh my God. Wait, I want some clarity, please, on grandma. So she's racing. Is she racing in the car or against men?
In the car against, she's in a race car.
She's the driver.
Yeah, she's a driver. Is this in like the 1920s in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan? And she played hockey and like all this cool stuff that no other woman was doing. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Very, very, very cool. All right. Well, Jill, hang out in the green room for just a second. Don't go anywhere. I'll put you back in there. Much, much gratitude. Thanks for giving us some time today and sharing your expertise.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Really quickly, hang out there. Jerry and I are just going to remind some folks, and Jerry, you can let me know what else we need to remind about. I'm thinking cxr.work/events. So if you're looking for upcoming activity, meetings, in person or virtual, we're doing that. You can check that out at /events, cxr.work/events. Something that I will call out, we do have members only meetings on there, but we also have meetings that are open to the public. One of those that's even a little more casual than some of our standard meetings would be the book club. So our own Barb Reese runs that piece, and we've got a series of books reading, and they're putting that list together. It is open to anybody in the TA space, so you don't have to be a CXR member. But it is awfully nice to see our members join in on that. But they meet every couple of weeks to talk through various books. Jerry, what's one other thing we should talk to folks about before we let them go?
Well, the scholarship we do, I think, is already in progress. So there's nothing anybody can add to that. Well, we give a scholarship out each year of $10,000, and it's someone who's studying either HR or talent acquisition, but we tend to lean towards those folks who are a little more radical in terms of what they might be doing once they get there. So that's like adding Trojan horses to the.
I wouldn't put it that way, but I love that.
That's the way I look at it. That's why I have a big smile on my face when they're doing it. But we probably should mention again, we're interviewing a number of people for Community Up, which is a willingness to offer to people in transition who are talent acquisition leaders an interview with you or I or Barb. And if you get past us, it's basically free membership while they're in transition up to about, 60, 90 days?
We're doing it 60 days into their new employment. So if they've been displaced and they're a TA professional and an alumni or a member, we'll refer them. They can, if they get through the gauntlet, to bring them in, because we do have some standards for membership. We welcome them in and they get that free full membership all the way into 60 days of their new employment. We're excited about that. That's a new one.
Yeah.
And it's cxr.work/up.
Yep.
Yeah, because I don't like math. We keep it super, super easy. All right. With that, we're going to say thank you to everybody. And Heidi Ho, it's The Simpsons. Heidi Ho, neighbor.
Simpsons?
It's Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. That's where it was. Told you it would come to me. Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the CXR channel. Please subscribe to CXR on your favorite podcast resource and leave us a review while you're at it. Learn more about CXR at our website, cxr.works, facebook.com and twitter.com/careercrossroads, and on Instagram @careerxroads. We'll catch you next time.